Hey there, have procrastination, perfectionism, or self-doubt still stealing your dreams? What if you could finally finish that one project, your book, your course, your podcast in just 12 weeks? That is exactly what we do inside the Delay to Daily Action course, a proven system to help you plan, focus, and follow through. And right now, it's 15% off until the end of the year. Don't wait for the perfect time because this is your time. Click in the link in this episode show notes to start turning delay into daily action. And I'll see you in the course.
So people with ADHD tend to be what I call time optimists, which is we're like, oh, that'll only take 10 minutes and it will take 45, right? And it's because we just really struggle to estimate that's part of time blindness. And so we really struggle to estimate how long things will take. Well, then of course, when you're trying to plan a project, for example, you're almost always going to be like at the deadline like that because you really underestimated how long everything was going to take to do. But when you start to track your time, you start to see where there's patterns, right? So like I said, generally speaking, we tend to be optimistic about what our time is. With my clients, we tend to underestimate how long something will take by about half. So if you think it'll take 20 minutes, it will more than likely take 40, for example. If it is a non-preferred task, just something you really don't want to do, we will overestimate how long it will take by like 3 times.
Welcome to the Minute Mastery Podcast, a conversational productivity and time management podcast where busy authors and entrepreneurs are inspired to create time for what truly matters. I'm your host, Ngozi Edema. I'm a time management coach, writer, and entrepreneur. Here, you are encouraged to turn your minutes into milestones and to create at least 1 hour a day working on your goals without feeling overwhelmed. Today's conversation is one so many women will resonate with. My guest is Jorie Houlihan. She's a wife, mom of 2 ADHD teens, ADHD life coach, speaker, and educator. Her own ADHD diagnosis didn't come until she was age 49, after decades of feeling like she was floundering from one thing to the next. Why doctors dismiss her concerns, from theater students to massage therapists to network marketer, real estate agents, and beyond. Nothing seemed to stick until she finally had the clarity of an ADHD diagnosis. Now, Jorie uses her lived experience and professional expertise to help women understand a powerful truth. Pills don't teach skills. While medication can play a role in managing ADHD, she believes the missing piece is equipping women with practical tools, science-backed strategies, and self-compassion in order to thrive in daily life. You're welcome to the show, Jorie.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited about this.
Yeah, and I'm also excited about this topic because while I do like pills, I'm going to start from there. And I do encourage people to take pills if they have problems.
Yes.
But it's not my first go-to place. I always try everything else. And if everything else fails, then I go there. And even when I'm taking pills, I still have to look for other strategy that can help me cope with a situation. And that is not just ADHD, but any other thing in my life. So I really like this discussion. I don't know how it will go. So I'm leaving you to explain to us. You've always said pills don't teach skills. I agree with you. But what do you mean by that? And what skills do women with ADHD need in order to thrive?
So that's a really great question. When I was first diagnosed, I naively thought, okay, now that I know what this is, I can totally handle this on my own. I don't need medication. I don't need therapy. I don't need coaching. I can totally handle this. And I could not, in fact, do that. And one of my friends reached out and she said, you haven't started meds yet, have you? And I was like, is it that obvious? And she's like, yeah. And she also had it. So she understood what was going on. But I was just drowning. And so when I started medication, it absolutely changed a lot for me. So I do understand the importance of medication. I am medicated myself. I also know that it should not be the only tool that you use in that toolbox. The pills helped me learn the skills because I couldn't be present enough to learn and retain information. And the medication helps me to be more present so that when I am maybe finding myself resistant to doing a task, I have more likely of a chance anyway that I will stop and say, okay, I'm feeling resistance to this. What's going on here? As opposed to having a complete emotional spiral or just doom scrolling all day in my head going, go do the thing. I go, why can't I do the thing? So, and I also know that there are some people who can't do medication or who don't want to do medication. And so it is really important to understand some basic skills that can help with like day-to-day tasks. And the medication, because the medication, I think a lot of times people think it will just make all of their ADHD symptoms go away. And unfortunately, that is not the case. I still have terrible time blindness, for example. So, but I'm now present enough to go, oh, I am having some time blindness here. Like I'm struggling to prioritize because I can't figure out how much time this is going to take, right? That kind of thing. Whereas before I couldn't do that. So understanding though what those skills are, like how do I learn how to prioritize? How do I learn how to manage my time blindness? How do I manage my emotional dysregulation? Those are all things that regardless of medication or not, you need to learn so that you can better manage your symptoms, and then you will have a much better chance of really thriving in your life instead of just feeling like you're just getting by and surviving.
Thank you very much for this explanation. So you advocate that you may go through the medication route, but you also need to learn skills that will help you cope with the problems that come with ADHD.
Yes.
Thank you. So you often mix science with storytelling. What should every woman with ADHD know about the brain chemicals like dopamine, for instance?
Mm-hmm.
How that knowledge change how they approach their daily life?
So I think it's really important to have a basic understanding of the two main neurotransmitters that we talk about that impact ADHD or that are impacted by ADHD, which is dopamine and norepinephrine. So dopamine, so first of all, a neurotransmitter is a chemical messenger of the brain, and every neurotransmitter has its own receptor. And for people who have ADHD, we are low on dopamine. So sometimes it's just our body just doesn't produce enough. They have also found that for some people, there are too many receptors in areas of the brain. And so it will suck the dopamine in too quickly. It's also called uptake. So the dopamine doesn't have a chance to mature to its fullest extent, which is needed for the next leg of its journey. And I also had heard there was a study that showed that sometimes the dopamine can't find the receptors. And I thought that was very ADHD. Even our dopamine gets distracted, right? So, but what dopamine does is dopamine is, it is what gets you to do the thing. It's what gives you motivation. It is what gets you to, like, even if it's a boring task, if you have enough dopamine, right, it will be the thing that gets you to do it. And it's what gives you a sense of accomplishment as well. And so people who do not have ADHD have naturally higher levels, obviously, of dopamine. They also get a hit of dopamine just thinking about completing a task, which is very nice for them. We don't get that. But that is why we often struggle with task initiation, for example. If your dopamine's low, it's really hard to get moving. Now, we will talk about some things later that will help with that. But it is, that is the thing that will get you to do the thing or to keep you to follow through, right? Because we sometimes joke, oh yeah, the dopamine ran out. And so understanding that part of it will help you understand why sometimes you struggle with starting a task or following through. And then dopamine is then converted into norepinephrine. And so it's also known as noradrenaline. And that is what fires the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe of the brain, in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, there's two things. The first is that the frontal lobe works as a filter. So, we're inundated with information all day long, right? And we don't need to know like 99% of it on a conscious level. And so a properly working frontal lobe is going to take that 99% and throw it somewhere in your subconscious. So then only the really important things get through. And when they go through, the rest of the brain says, oh, that got through. It must be important. We need to pay attention to it, more or less. So, but if you have low dopamine, or if, your dopamine didn't mature the way it should have, right? How well do you think that frontal lobe is firing? Not as well. So we have way more information that gets through. Unfortunately, the rest of the brain is still saying, oh, that got through. It must be important. We need to pay attention to it. So that is in part one of the reasons why we can be so easily distracted. And so I sometimes like to give people a visual. So think of a properly working frontal lobe as like an Oprah level executive assistant, because nobody sees Oprah unless they're really important, right?
Yes.
Because they're that good. I date myself a little bit when I make this reference for how our brain works. But if you've ever watched the Carol Burnett show, she played a character called Mrs. Wiggins, who was literally the worst secretary on the planet. And she would walk really slow. And she was always like chomping her gum and doing her nails. And like anybody and their mother could get through to see her boss, right? And that's kind of what our executive assistant is like, if we even have one. So if you needed a visual, that's the one I like to talk about. And then the other part of the frontal lobe is where a lot of our executive functions are housed, right? So planning, organizing, prioritizing, time management, all of that is in there. So again, if you don't have enough dopamine to convert into norepinephrine, it's probably not going to fire as well. And so that's where you're going to have some issues. There are 4 different areas of the brain. I'm not going to get into that today, but there's other areas of the brain that are also impacted by ADHD, but that's the main one, the main part of it that we usually talk about. So I hope that kind of, usually when I start to explain those things, people go, oh, that's why I struggle with that. Oh, that's what's going on. I think it's good to have a little science background on that before we get into the other stuff. So then you can kind of go, okay, now that I better understand why this is happening, it makes it a little bit easier to put tools in place.
Thank you. So you've explained the science bit now. So how can we use that knowledge to approach daily life? Now we know is a problem.
Yes.
And so everything goes through. I can just see myself in the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything goes through. So and everything has the same importance and urgency and everything.
Yes.
And you
Yes.
every single day. How can we approach our daily life with this problem?
So the first thing I will tell you is you must have a sense of humor because you will need it. We have really cool brains when we figure out how to work them. A lot of women sometimes feel broken, right? Because they're always late or they miss assignments or, they miss a deadline or whatever it is. And what I like to say is this: while the rest of the world has a PC brain, we were born with Macs. But having the Mac brain isn't actually the problem. The problem is that we were given the PC manual to work with, which is why things don't always line up, right? Things don't always work out the way for us that they do for other people. And it's because we have a completely different operating system. And so when you can start to go, oh, okay, so I need to write my own owner's manual, then it can actually be kind of fun. So, starting to recognize what your patterns are, for example, one of the first things I do with my clients is I have them track their time. And I'm like, you don't have to do this for every little thing, but the things that in the areas where you lose time, say it's in the morning, right? And it's almost always the shower, by the way. And so they will track their time. And I said, you have to handwrite it out. All things analog whenever possible. And then you can put things into digital form, but our brain takes like writing out things first. We absorb it better. And analog clocks as well. But anyway, so if you say, so they have to write down how long they think it will take to do whatever the task is, how long it actually took, and then the difference. So people with ADHD tend to be what I call time optimists, which is we're like, oh, that'll only take 10 minutes and it will take 45, right? And it's because we just really struggle to estimate that. That's part of time blindness. And so we really struggle to estimate how long things will take. Well, then of course, when you're trying to plan a project, for example, you're almost always going to be like at the deadline like that because you really underestimated how long everything was going to take to do. But when you start to track your time, you start to see where there's patterns, right? So like I said, generally speaking, we tend to be optimistic about what our time is. With my clients, we tend to underestimate how long something will take by about half. So if you think it'll take 20 minutes, it will more than likely take 40, for example. If it is a non-preferred task, just something you really don't want to do, we will overestimate how long it will take by like 3 times. So if it legitimately will only take 20 minutes, we're like, that'll take an hour. Oh, that'll take too much time. Then we procrastinate. So starting to figure out what your patterns are. So then it makes it easier for the planning, right? So if you go, okay, I tend to underestimate by about half. My instinct is to say 20 minutes. So I'm going to say 40 instead. That gives you some breathing room. So that's just an example of ways that you can start to take a look at the different areas where you struggle with ADHD. And just the whole first part of my working with my clients is really focusing on the self-awareness aspect of it. Because for people whose brains want to pay attention to everything, we are spectacularly unself-aware. So they don't realize that their perfectionism is part of all or nothing thinking, which is part of ADHD. They don't realize that their chattiness is part of their hyperactivity, for example, or interrupting is part of impulse control, impulse shopping, impulse control struggles, right? So there's a lot of different areas where it shows up. And most people, even when they get diagnosed, tend to think it's just, squirrel and losing things all the time. And for me, those are kind of the least of my problems with it. So when you can start to see what your specific challenges are, and you really start to pay attention to what is going on with those, like I said, discovering the patterns, that opens up a whole new world of tools for you, because then you can go, okay, now I know, for example, going back to the time, I know this is what I do. This is how I can accommodate that so that I'm not running so behind all the time. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Does. And I like the impression you gave about the Mac operating system and the PC operating system. So the rest of the world have the PC, they have the same manual. But you have a Mac, but you're using a PC operating manual, which wouldn't work for a Mac.
Exactly.
And why that is a problem, what it now means is that you have to design your own manual that works for you.
Yes. And if I always tell my clients all the time, just look at everything through the lens of curiosity. We tend to be very hard on ourselves. We are our own worst bullies most of the time. The things we say to ourselves, we would never say to another person. And so when you can look at it through the lens of curiosity instead of judgment, like, oh, I messed up again. Oh, I screwed up again. And go, okay, so that didn't work out. Let's look at what happened, right? Automatically the tone changes, you're talking nicer to yourself, and then it feels more like a science experiment, right? Like, so an example of all or nothing thinking that I think all of us can relate to if we have ADHD is we finally have a system in place, it doesn't work one day, and we throw the whole system out, right? And we very rarely actually have to throw the whole system out. Sometimes it is just simply, you had a bad day, and it will be fine tomorrow. But the other part of it is, let's look at the whole system and say, okay, this was working really well until what point in the system? What happened there, right? And again, it may have just been a one-off, but it could be something that you go, you know what, maybe I do need to tweak this somehow, or maybe I do need to replace this part. I don't necessarily have to throw the whole system out. And so that, when I finally figured that part out, that was huge for me, because we get a lot of dopamine for putting systems together because it's novel and it's new and it's exciting. But then when it starts, now you have to we tend to make things too complicated because we're in the moment. We're like, oh, we'll add this and we'll add that and da-da-da. But then it's not something we can sustain. Understanding, like, make everything as simple as possible, that will help tremendously.
Okay, thank you so much for your explanation. So what are some ADHD-friendly systems or strategies that you recommend for long-term benefit, especially for women who've tried everything and always abandoning planners and productivity?
I could put my kids through college on the amount of money I have spent on planners in my lifetime, I have to say. I do actually I found one I do like now, which is great, but it's still one of those things where I still am a little like, do I want to say I like it? Because then I might not stick with it. So the first thing is, and I tell this to everybody, you will have a system that works until it doesn't. Our brain loves novelty. And so when something, even if it's working really great, sometimes if it gets into that boring zone, your brain's going to start looking for other things. I feel it's always a good idea to have a backup plan, right? For whatever that is, whatever that system is, because you can always go back to the system later when the new one becomes less novel, right? Like learning how to ebb and flow is really important. One of the systems though that I think every woman with ADHD can benefit from is understanding your energy patterns. Our energy is not the same as everybody else's because it takes much more energy for us to get out of inertia, right? So if you've been doom scrolling because you can't get yourself to do the thing and you're like, how am I exhausted? I've done nothing, right? But it's because you have all of this mental energy going into just go do the thing. Why can't I do the thing? There's all the emotional stuff that goes behind it. And as well as it just takes a lot more for us to do energy-wise, to do things that other people consider simple. But for our brains, it's not. So let me give you an example. Laundry, right? Laundry is my nemesis. I hate laundry with every ounce of my being. And so, and what I found interesting when I was getting into all this was neurotypical people tend to look at laundry as a task. My brain says, I have to gather all the clothes. I have to sort the clothes. I have to put the clothes in the washing machine. I have to put the soap in. I have to close the door. Like my brain counts every single one of those things as a step. And because there's so many little steps, I get overwhelmed and that makes me tired, right? It's one of the reasons I don't like doing laundry. But that was really interesting to me because when you look at it, instead of it just being, oh, you just do some laundry, then it's not that big of a deal. But for me, that's how my brain breaks it down. Then there are other things that my brain should break down into bit smaller pieces, and it doesn't. It just sort of depends on whatever the task is. So, but when you can start to see what your energy levels are like at different times of the day and even throughout the week, right? So by Thursday, your energy may not be the same than it is Monday morning when you're, fresh off a weekend. But so for example, my best time of day is actually the morning. I've taken my medication, I've had breakfast, and I'm ready to rock and roll. It's when my focus is best and my energy is best. So that's when I do more mentally taxing things that do require more attention to detail, things that do require more focus, right? I will not do those things now in the afternoon. I won't because my brain's like, no, we're good. We're going to go take a nap now. So, around 2:30 for me is a crash. And I don't take clients during that time. I don't have meetings at that time. I sometimes will go take a little, and I actually am good at power naps. I can take a 15-minute nap and I'm good. When I started to become okay with that, because I know I'll get a second wind around 4:00, so I can work another hour or so after that, and then I can be done with my day. And I used to feel like such a failure because I would hit that 2:30 spot and go, I got to work through this. I have to work through this. And we do that because we're afraid of being called lazy. That's part of it. And you don't have to work through that part, or even if it's not a big crash, maybe that's when you do the more mindless stuff that doesn't need a huge attention, the detail kind of thing, right? Or maybe that's when you do a more creative thing where you don't have to be so focused on it. So that to me is one of the best skills that somebody with ADHD can learn, is understanding what their energy patterns are, because that is when you can actually utilize hyperfocus to an advantage. Because I think we've all had that hyperfocus where we have ended up like 3 hours later realizing it's 3 hours later and we think it's been 5 minutes and we've been researching the history of spoons, right? Like we're not working on the thing that we should be working on. Ask me how I know this. So what I tell people to do is I have I use visual timers. So like this is my visual timer. I like it because I can see how much time I have left. I strongly recommend getting one of these. And then I only work no longer than 50 minutes, 50 minutes. And then I'll take a 10-minute break and I time my break. People tend to freak out about breaks because they're worried if they stop, they won't go back. Let me go back to my first point and then I'll talk about breaks. But when now I can't remember what I was originally talking about. See, ADHD. Let me talk about the breaks first.
Yeah.
We panic about breaks because we think, but if I stop, I won't go back. So when I ask people, okay, when the last time that happened, how long had you been working before you took a break? And they will usually say, oh, I don't know, at least 2 hours, at least. I'm like, okay. And during that time, did you nourish yourself? Did you hydrate? Did you get any movement? How long had you been holding your bladder? ADHD is the only condition I know where we literally procrastinate to pee. I don't know why we do that, but it is a thing. And so when they look at it that way, they go, oh, okay. I'm like, so that's why you didn't go back. Your brain was like, we're done. But if you don't wait too long to take your breaks, right? So like I said, I only go no more than 50 minutes usually. Then so there's that. Then I time my break because sometimes I'll forget I'm on a break. I write down and put it where I can see it exactly what I am going to do when I get back. Because sometimes we'll get back to what we were doing and we suddenly go, wait, what was I working on? And that vagueness, when we're not clear on what the next step is, that will shut us down every time. So know exactly what you're coming back to do. And the last rule is no sitting. If you sit on a comfy couch and start doom scrolling on your phone, you're toast, right?
Yeah.
The exception to that is if you want to sit on a fairly uncomfortable dining room chair to nourish yourself, I'm fine with that. But you just want to make sure you don't get too comfortable. And sitting tends to be where we lose that momentum. So that became a part of the break rule. So that is part of it. And I'm trying to remember now what I was originally going to say before that, and I can't remember.
Yeah, I can remember too.
To be later. It always
But
does.
when we're watching the video again, we're like, oh, that was it.
I'll be like, wait, what was I saying? Like when I do my coaching sessions on Zoom, I have transcripts so that I can say, wait a minute, let me go back and look in your transcript so that I can see, because something will make me go, oh, this is what I want to say.
Yeah.
And so I really love having those because it does help me in that respect.
I always like notes too, because notes help me to remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah. And since you are here, I thought I'd let you know of a storybook to gift your favorite kids. Once upon a time, and they lived happily ever after. Children love those phrases. I love them too. And I suspect you may love them too. As a mom, I've spent hours reading and listening to my children read their favorite stories. And now I write stories too. Here is one of them you may want to check out. The Proud Sunflower. It is the story of Princess Sanzu, the Sunflower Princess, a princess loved by all, but who got into trouble. Within the pages of The Proud Sunflower, you encounter what real beauty is. Your kid will love the beautiful story and powerful illustrations. The Proud Sunflower serves as a gentle reminder that we all need to stand on the shoulders of others to succeed. So, read this story with your little ones and allow it to illuminate the universal language of empathy, forgiveness, and personal growth. The Proud Sunflower is a top book of parenting, morals, and responsibility, and it's available on the Kindle store and on paperback formats. Excellent for beginner readers. Click in this episode show notes or in the description on YouTube to order yours. And check out my other storybooks to read with your kids, or gift a child a storybook if you do not have kids of your own. So how can ADHD women begin to shift from seeing themselves as broken, which is it's always there, to embracing their brains with curiosity and confidence? Because like you said, if we know how to work with things, but then you can be in a loop where you're not happy with yourself because you're not getting tasks done.
Okay, so the first thing is, I will just tell you, you don't have to believe me, but you're not broken. Like I said earlier, you just have a different operating system, and you don't know, you've been using the wrong owner's manual your whole life. So that's why you feel broken, right? Once you really absorb that and you start to say, okay, well, what can I do to really start making a difference? Like, how can I start seeing some change? This is really hard for us. So first of all, we are terrible about asking for help, but I do recommend getting a coach, getting a therapist if you can, people who can just kind of help to guide you through some of this. Because when we try to do it on our own, it can get incredibly overwhelming, and we are easily overwhelmed. That's part of the emotional dysregulation. And so that will make us quit a lot of the time, right? Or feel worse, feel broken. I would also say that going back to that curiosity, right? When you just start to go, okay, actually, let me go back to one other thing. It's really important when you are trying new strategies to try one at a time and give it time. Because of all or nothing thinking, we have a tendency to go, I'm going to try all the things. And then you're going to get overwhelmed and you're not going to follow through on any of it. Or it might help you, but you're not sure which thing you tried helped you, right? Because you were doing too many of them. So pick one thing. It's so hard to do. I'm not going to lie. That is still a struggle for me. But it really makes a big difference because again, when we are trying to do a task, for example, and it's feeling too big, that can be one of the reasons we feel resistant to doing it. And so when we can break the task down into smaller components, it makes it feel more manageable. But if you break it down into two smaller components, then it will feel overwhelming because there's so many of them, right? So if you just have one step, just take one step and use it for a while. Don't just, if it doesn't work the first day, don't write it off yet. Keep trying it for a little bit and see. Because you can also tweak it to work for you. It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. We have a tendency, we're big people pleasers, which is a problem. And we tend to compare ourselves to other people. And people with ADHD, one of our gifts is that we are out of the box thinkers, right? We see everybody else's patterns. We don't always see our own, but we see everybody else's patterns really well. We see where there's gaps in in systems. We see, we just see a different way of looking at things. I joke all the time, if you've been trying to solve a problem and you've been using logic and it hasn't worked, give it to me, because I will just look at it from a different viewpoint, right? So if you can, while we're out of the box thinkers, we're like that with everything except for executive functioning, which is the planning, organizing, prioritizing. And then we try to shove ourselves in this neurotypical box. And that's not where we belong. So sometimes you have to just do things that seem maybe weird to other people. So let me give you, I had a client, this is a funny story. So she had this, you would walk in and she had this long table along a staircase that went up this way. And she had this beautiful bowl that she wanted to start putting her keys in because she was always losing her keys, right? And she was really struggling with putting it in that bowl. And she's like, I just walk right by it every time. And I said, okay, well, this is what I want you to try. And I said, I want you to go get a giant poster board and get some glitter, some fun markers, whatever. And I want you to have on this poster board, put keys in here now with a giant arrow. And I want you to put it right there because you're not going to miss that, right? And she was mortified because, of course, she's imagining what her neighbors are going to think. And I'm like, I assure you, many of them are going to go, I should probably do that. Right. And so she didn't have to do it for long because she was so embarrassed by it. She was like, okay, it's working. She only had to do it for like a day and a half because she was just like, I won't forget anymore because I just don't want to have that sign up again. And I was like, hey, but it worked, right? Sometimes we have to just think about what is going to work for me, right? Timers and reminders and stuff, they have their place, but also understand we don't like being told what to do. And so, I mean, nobody does, but we sort of take it to another level. And so even if it's something we want to do, if somebody tells us to do it before we get around to it, then our brain immediately is like, I'm not doing it now. You ruined it. Way to go, And that's what reminders and timers and alarms are kind of doing. They're kind of like, okay, you have to go do this thing now. And so our brain immediately gets but what I have learned to do is I label my alarms and timers and I'll give them goofy names, like, hey, get off your ass and get back to work, whatever it is, things like that. So that it's just something that makes me laugh a little bit. And then I don't take it as seriously. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I got to go back to work. Okay. But a lot of times, especially if you use them a lot, and if you're just having pings and dings going off all the time, you probably don't even know what half of them are for anymore. So labeling them helps. And so those are things that if you can allow yourself to think, okay, what are some fun things that might get me to do things I don't want to do, right? I'm big on gamifying. And I'm also big on pairing non-preferred tasks with preferred tasks to get you to do the thing. So, like I said before, laundry, not my friend. But one of the things that will get me to do it is I will listen to music that makes me dance. And every time and sometimes if I'm really overwhelmed, I'll say, okay, I'm just going to fold 3 things. And after 3 things, if I'm really done, then I'm done. But usually I'll go, okay, that was easy. I can do 3 things. But I'll do a little happy dance between those 3 things and then the next 3 things because we have to train ourselves to celebrate the micro wins.
Yeah.
Because we tend to judge our wins. Well, that wasn't very big. This is not, just celebrate it. I mentioned before, we don't have a natural sense of accomplishment because of our low dopamine. We tend to just be relieved it's over, whatever the task is, which sounds really depressing. But I say, but think of it this way. You have an excuse to learn how to celebrate things, right? Because when you can train yourself to be like, hey, I did the thing. I feel good. I did it when I didn't want to do it. That's even better, right? We're training ourselves to feel a little more accomplished, and that also will help us do the thing. I'm sure I've gone down a tangent and I'm not sure what, and I remember what I was going to talk about before, which was the power of hyperfocus.
Yeah.
See, I knew I'd come back.
Yes.
Okay. When you are working on something, set the timer for like maybe 20 minutes, have it go off, and then ask yourself, am I working on what I should be working on? Because sometimes we do go off, we go into hyperfocus and we're focusing on the wrong thing. If you're not, then you're like, all right, great. And then you can set the timer for another 20 minutes or for however long. So that's a way to make sure that you stay on track. The other thing I recommend is what I call the parking lot. I didn't come up with that name, but I love it, which is you have a piece of paper and a pen next to you at your desk, right? And maybe you're working on something. And that's when I always go, oh, I have to make a doctor's appointment. It has nothing to do with what I'm working on, of course. And in the old days, I would have stopped what I was working on to make the doctor's appointment because I was afraid I would forget to do it. But then I'll go, oh, you know what? I thought I had their number in my phone. I don't. Now I got to look it up. Now I'm online and that will be it for me. I will be researching something that has nothing to do with anything, and I'll lose a huge amount of time. So what I do now is if that idea comes to me, I write it down on that piece of paper, the parking lot, and go right back to what I was working on. And then I can find a way to schedule that in later in the day. So I'm glad I remember that part.
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
one last question. Emotional regulation is a big struggle with ADHD. So what do you recommend that women who are struggling, what do you recommend they do, especially handling emotional whiplash in a healthy way?
Yes. So a lot of people are very unaware that emotional dysregulation is a very big part of ADHD. And so we can sometimes have something called RSD, or rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is where even the perception of a criticism or a slight can send us reeling, and then we're convinced everybody hates us. But when this kind of goes back to patterns. When you start to pay attention to, okay, these kind of situations usually make me feel really overstimulated and I'm really uncomfortable and I don't want to be there. And you can feel this happening, right? Before just thinking about it. Okay, so what can we do? Is this something you have to go to, for example? If it's an event of some kind, but if it is, okay, what can we do to get you better prepared going in before you even go in? First, right? Let's do some deep breathing. Let's kind of picture it going well, right? And again, having a sense of humor about all of it. If you're going with somebody, have a word that just so they know you either need to leave, or you're saying, I'm going to go to the bathroom so I can try and calm my central nervous system. I'm going to go somewhere to do that so that they understand. Obviously, somebody who is going to be a safe person to do that with. If you're in a situation where you're feeling overstimulated, or you're getting that dysregulated and you're not sure what to do, always err on the side of, it seems so simple and a lot of people hate it because it's so simple, but deep breathing is one of the quickest ways to calm your central nervous system. So go find a quiet place somewhere and just focus on the breath coming in and going out. And in the beginning, you might feel kind of irritated by it, which I know sounds weird, but the more you do it and really take in deep breaths, hold it for a little bit, let it go for a little bit, it does such a good job for helping to calm you down a bit. Is that going to work in every situation? Of course not, but that is probably the number one tool. I have a client who, when I met her RSD and her emotional dysregulation was off the charts. And I'm not a therapist, right? There's certain aspects of this that are not in my scope. I said, but I can give you some tools that can help you with it in the moment. And she uses them. She uses them all the time because now she's also recognizing when it's starting to happen. Whereas before she would be well into it before she even noticed it, if she even noticed it. And she knows when she's going into certain situations, there are certain things she can do to help herself ahead of time. And so, and the deep breathing is one of the ones she probably uses the most. So don't dismiss that. And also remember too, emotional dysregulation isn't just feeling the feeling quote unquote bad stuff. It's also sometimes like joy, right? How many of us have been told you're too much? That's probably been part of why, right? We're super excited about something and they're just like, why are you so excited about this? But for us, it's like a really big deal. And we get really, and so we get told we're too much. And I don't know if any of you know who Elise Myers is. She's somebody who's on TikTok or whatever, and I adore her. And she said, what I tell people now is, if I'm too much, go find less. And I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Because if I'm feeling really joyful, it might be a little over the top, but I would rather be over top about that than, if I'm having a spiral downward, for crying out loud. So just something to kind of think about.
Yeah, I needed to hear today because that's me. I'm up when I'm excited about something.
Yeah, and sometimes I will talk and I don't even take a breath, and I have no idea because I'm just excited about this thing. And I've had people go, "Can you breathe? You're making me nervous. You're not breathing." And I'm just like, "What? I'm so excited." So, and not surprisingly, bipolar disorder is often misdiagnosed as ADHD and vice versa, in part because of the highs and the lows of the emotional stuff. So I thought that was very interesting. And you can have both. And I can't even imagine with that. But it is, but again, just know what it is for you. We control our environment most of the time. And that includes who you surround yourself with. And if you are with people who do not support you, who do not try to help you, who do not try to be understanding when you're struggling with a task and you're still trying to figure out what about it is making you struggle with it, you need to consider that. It's hard sometimes to be that person who's trying to support, but they don't know how to yet. And so I always encourage people, watch reels on ADHD. I'm like, go check out my reels and stuff like this, because I do it in part to educate people who don't have it so that they can better understand what their partner's going through, what their kid is going through, whatever. Because it's so hard to explain this to people who don't have it. And sometimes they also need to hear it from somebody other than you, right? Because sometimes they may say, oh, you're just using that as an excuse. That's a big one.
People always say that. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, this is a choice. I wish. No, it's not a choice. But when they hear somebody else talking about it and they go, oh, that's what my wife does, or that's what my husband does. And then they start to say, okay, it's not just him. It's that kind of third party validation, right? And it's really helpful because ADHD is incredibly heritable. If one parent has it, almost always at least one of the kids has it. I have it, both my kids have it. And all three of our ADHD looks completely different from the others. It's just, my son looks exactly like what people think of when they think of ADHD. My daughter looks pretty typical for the female ADHD. She's the inattentive presentation. I'm combined presentation, so I got everything. And how it shows up for us is all different. And so when you can surround yourself with people who at least are trying to understand it, that makes a huge difference, because then you don't feel so anxious around them. And that anxiety around people who do not support you or who are not even trying, that adds to the emotional dysregulation, and all of that makes our symptoms worse. Yeah. So, and also hormones. So I'm in menopause now, and let me tell you, it's a whole other ballgame. Our estrogen is directly tied to our dopamine levels. So when our estrogen tanks, so does our dopamine. And so that's why women who don't have ADHD, when they go into menopause, they're like, I'm suddenly foggy brained. And I'm like, yes, welcome. I live here. Now it's so much worse because I'm in menopause. So, but that also will have a lot to do with how we react to things, how we handle that emotional aspect of it. And again, if you are surrounded by people who understand that, or at least will, deal with it in a positive way, it makes such a big difference. Because I have seen people who are their emotional dysregulation lasted longer because they were so anxious about the person that they were with and not wanting them to feel, whatever. And I'm like, but that's one of the things that's making this last longer. That anxiety is not helping any of this. And so learning, again, what your patterns are and surrounding yourself with good people, I cannot stress it enough. It makes a world of difference.
Thank you very much. It's so inspiring because, ADHD can be challenging, but you've given us points to help us cope with it. That it's not, it shouldn't make anyone broken, but it just gives you something to work on, something to adjust in your life. Just create your own manual. I like that. I always use that now.
Well, and when I was diagnosed, I actually felt a big relief because I went, I don't have to keep doing these personal development courses because they're not meant for me I finally realized, because think about how many personal development courses you've probably taken, how many self-help books you've read, and none of them were designed with you in mind. They don't talk about time blindness at all, right?
Oh, they don't. No.
And so you've been trying to, and then wondering, and so then you feel like the failure because it didn't work for you, but it wasn't designed for how you work. So that's why I think it's kind of fun to sort of write your own, so to speak, because ADHD is a spectrum. There's no one size fits all answer for any of this.
Everyone, like you said, you and your daughter are different.
Yeah, and so when you can just look at it as, like I said, an experiment, just play around with it, be creative with it. We're very creative people. I think it really makes a big difference in terms of how we manage our symptoms, how we approach the world. I want women to feel empowered with their ADHD. And the first thing you have to do is embrace that you have it. A lot of times we tend to be, I'm going to fight this thing. And I'm like, no, you're going to lose that one. It's not going anywhere. So when you really start to embrace it, it makes a huge difference as well. And you really start to go, okay, what can I do that's going to help me today? But remember, start small.
Yeah.
And yeah. And if it doesn't work, whatever you try, it is not a failing. It is not a personal failing. It just didn't work for your brain. And that's okay. You'll just try something else. And that's amazing because now you know that doesn't work for you, right? So you can put that in the doesn't work pile. Great.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So where can this audience find you?
So you can find me at joriehoulihan.com. And I'm not sure when this is going, but I am also launching my own podcast on October 14th. I'm very excited about it. It's called ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. And I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all those places. So almost all of them are Jorie Houlihan. It's pretty easy to find. And I'm sure you'll put them in the show notes too, but that's the main places you can find me.
Okay, so I mean, this podcast will be aired, I think, about the 2nd or 3rd week of November.
Okay, so it will already be
out then.
Yep, it will be, and hopefully people will be listening.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jorie, for coming to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you. What a powerful and refreshing conversation with Jorie Houlihan. I love how she reminds us that why medication can support ADHD is the skills, the systems, and the mindset shifts that truly change the way we live. If you are connected with Jorie's story or want to learn more about her work, make sure to check her out in the links in this episode show notes. And if this episode spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend who needs to hear that they are not broken, they are just wired differently. And thank you for tuning in to the Minute Mastery Podcast. If you have found this episode helpful, share it with someone who could use more time in their day, and remember to subscribe and leave us a review. Until next time, you are in control of your time and you've got this.